Maybe you clicked out of curiosity. Or maybe, without even realizing, you were looking for a quieter place, a space where words arrive gently and silence is part of the story, too. I wrote this with care, like stitching together memories, heartaches, and moments of truth, hoping that somewhere in these lines, you might find a piece of yourself. And if you do, even for a second, stay. Listen for as long as it feels right. And if you feel like it, leave a small sign, nothing big. Sometimes a quiet "I'm here" in the comments says more than you think. If this story resonates with you, feel free to share it or pass it along to someone who might need it. And if you'd like to walk with us a little further, you're always welcome to subscribe. My name's Agatha Whitmore. I'm 65 years old, and for most of my adult life, I was half of Whitmore and Associates, a boutique consulting firm my late husband Harold and I built from scratch in the heart of Boston. We weren't flashy, we weren't unicorn-chasing Silicon Valley types, but we had a reputation, the kind that gets you in the room with Fortune 500 companies when they're bleeding money and can't figure out why. For 32 years, Harold was the strategist. I was the closer. He had the vision. I had the execution. Together, we were unstoppable, until cancer stopped him. It's funny how quickly you go from reviewing merger documents to sitting in a funeral home trying to decide between pine or mahogany for the casket. When Harold passed, it wasn't just my husband I lost. It was my business partner, my sounding board, my compass. After the funeral, the first thing I did was shut the office for a month. Not because I had to, because I couldn't walk past his desk without falling apart. I told our last few clients that we were winding things down, and that if they needed transition support, my son Tyson would handle it. Tyson, he's a good man, kind-hearted, grew up tagging along to our weekend planning sessions, scribbling mock contracts on Post-it notes. Harold used to joke that Tyson had been in corporate since he was 8. He didn't go into consulting, though. He went into operations, eventually becoming a project lead at a mid-sized tech company. When Harold died, Tyson and his wife Zuri were there for me in a way I didn't expect. They brought groceries, checked on me, even invited me to stay with them for a few weeks, though I politely declined. I needed my space, and they needed theirs. It was Zuri, actually, who first suggested I consider stepping away from the company permanently. She said it gently, over wine. "Agatha, I know how much the firm meant to you and Harold, but maybe now's the time to take care of yourself. You've earned it. Let us help with the transition. Tyson's great with numbers, and I've managed team budgets before. We could handle it, just until you're ready." At first, I resisted. I wasn't ready to let go. But the truth was, I didn't have the energy to keep steering a ship I no longer believed in. The office felt like a mausoleum, and deep down, I was afraid that clinging to it meant clinging to a version of myself that no longer existed. So I agreed. We didn't dissolve the company, just paused active operations. There were still a few loose ends, a couple of long-term retainers, some IP assets, and the business credit accounts. I handed over access and signing authority to Tyson, with the idea that he'd wrap things up over the next year or so. Zuri coordinated most of the handoffs. She was efficient, polished, and honestly, a bit more assertive than I remembered. But she always smiled sweetly and called me Mom. And after the fog of grief I'd been in, that felt comforting. I downsized, sold the house in Beacon Hill, and moved into a quieter place in Cambridge. Nothing fancy, but enough space for me and Harold's books. I told myself I'd rest, maybe travel, maybe finally read the stack of novels I'd never gotten around to. I didn't think much about the business after that. I trusted my son. And Zuri? She looked me in the eye the day I handed her the last file and said, "Just rest, Mom. We've got everything covered now." And I believed her. The first Sunday dinner felt warm. Tyson grilled steaks. Zuri made her signature kale salad with toasted almonds and goat cheese. We opened a bottle of wine Harold had been saving for something special. They even pulled out the good china, the set I gave them for their wedding. It was quiet. Too quiet. But I told myself that was just grief hanging in the air. Everyone was adjusting. The second Sunday dinner was different. Tyson and Zuri were already halfway through appetizers when I arrived, early by my watch. Zuri blinked, clearly surprised to see me at the door. "Oh, we didn't think you were coming this week. Tyson said you've been a bit forgetful lately." "I never said that," Tyson muttered from the kitchen. But he didn't exactly correct her either. I laughed it off. I laughed it off. I'd brought a homemade peach cobbler, the recipe Harold loved. Zuri took it with a polite smile and said, "How sweet. I'm sure Tyson will appreciate it. He's been watching his sugar, though, so we'll save it for later." It never made it to the table. As the weeks went on, little things started to stack up. Zuri began explaining things to me slowly, like I was hard of hearing. Tyson started second-guessing my memory, asking if I was sure about things I'd always been sharp on. One evening, when I misremembered the name of a restaurant we'd visited as a family years ago, Zuri gave Tyson a look. One of those married couple looks, the kind that says, "See what I mean?" I started paying attention after that. At another dinner, Zuri offered to reorganize my pill case, said she noticed I hadn't been taking the right ones when I stayed over that weekend. She smiled sweetly while she did it, humming. When I reached for my phone to check the dosage instructions for myself, it was mysteriously missing until halfway through dessert. I brushed off the red flags. I told myself I was being paranoid, that it was just part of getting older. Then came the conversation I couldn't ignore. We were in the living room after dinner, Tyson watching a baseball game, Zuri scrolling her phone. I mentioned that I'd been thinking about doing some volunteer work, maybe at the library downtown. Something light, something useful. Zuri didn't even look up. "That's sweet, Agatha," she said. "But maybe it's time to just rest, you know? You've done enough. Your eyesight's been a little iffy lately, and you did say you forgot where you put your car keys last week." I blinked. Everyone misplaces keys. She finally looked at me, gently. Too gently. "Of course. I just mean, maybe it's time to think about having someone in place, just in case anything ever happens. You know, legally, like a power of attorney. Tyson could help manage bills and medical stuff if something came up. It's just safer." She said it so easily, like she was talking about groceries. Tyson looked uncomfortable, but didn't disagree. "We could at least talk to someone," he offered. "No pressure, Mom. Just options." I nodded, but I didn't sleep much that night. Zuri's suggestion wasn't unusual. A lot of people my age do set up financial safeguards, but it wasn't what she said. It was how she said it. Like it was already a done deal. Like she'd rehearsed the line in front of a mirror. After that, I started paying closer attention. Not to what they said, but to what they didn't. Zuri stopped including me in conversations about the company wrap-up. "Don't worry, I'll update you," she'd say. But the updates got fewer and vaguer. Tyson seemed distracted any time I brought it up, brushing me off with, "It's all under control, Mom." They stopped asking me to bring anything to dinner. Zuri started cutting me off when I spoke about the early days of the business. "Let's not make it all about the past," she'd say lightly. But with that edge, I was starting to recognize. Eventually, even Tyson started pausing before answering my questions. Like he was considering how fragile I might be today. I could see it in his eyes. Caution, like he was stepping around someone unstable. I wasn't being taken care of. I was being managed. I began writing everything down. Conversations, dates, things I'd noticed. I needed to keep track, if only to prove to myself that I wasn't imagining it. Because deep down, a question had begun to fester. Quiet but sharp. Were they caring for me? Or quietly rewriting me as a burden? Tyson has always been the kind of man who wants to fix things. When he was 10, he tried to repair our kitchen sink with duct tape and YouTube tutorials. When he was 19 and his college roommates spiraled into debt, Tyson took a part-time job to help cover rent. And when his father died, he stepped into the role of man of the house, so quickly it made my head spin, even if I hadn't asked him to. But even the best sons can be blind when love comes wrapped in the right packaging. Zuri had charm and polish, and the kind of warm professionalism that made people assume competence before she even opened her mouth. She worked in marketing before she quit to focus on helping Tyson grow professionally. Her words, not mine. They'd been married 4 years, and I had no reason to doubt her intentions. At first, until things started slipping. Tyson called me one Thursday evening, sounding exhausted. "Work's a mess," he admitted. "Budget cuts. My boss is out for blood. Zuri's been great, though. She's been looking into new opportunities. We've talked about maybe launching something of our own." I paused. "Like, your own business?" "Yeah," he said. "Just ideas for now. But we'd need capital. And honestly, wrapping up Whitmore and Associates might free up some assets. We could rebrand the whole thing. Pivot." My stomach twisted. "The company was your father's legacy. It's not a side project." "I know, Mom. I'm just saying. Maybe it doesn't have to sit there collecting dust." The next week, they invited me over for coffee. Not dinner, coffee. Casual, low stakes. The kind of setting where you're supposed to feel relaxed enough to agree to things. Zuri brought out a manila folder halfway through my second cup. "Don't worry," she said with a breezy laugh. "This isn't an ambush." Inside were neatly printed documents. A simple ownership transfer agreement. Just a temporary one, they said. Tyson would hold my majority share in Whitmore and Associates for legal streamlining purposes, to make it easier to apply for new funding under a single name, should the opportunity arise. "We'd still treat it as yours," Tyson said. "You'll always have the final say." I read through the papers in silence. Everything looked legitimate, clean, temporary. Still, I hesitated. "Why now?" Tyson looked sheepish. "Honestly, because we've been approached about a joint venture, but the investors said it's hard to move forward without clear ownership. They want to know who's in charge. You're technically still listed as managing partner and, well, you've said you don't want to run it." Zuri jumped in, her tone gentle. "It's just logistics, Agatha. You've earned a break, and we'd never do anything without keeping you in the loop." They were saying all the right things, and I wanted to believe them. I missed Harold. I missed not having to second-guess people I loved. So I signed. Not the whole company, just my controlling interest, just until they could get things moving. It felt like a gesture of trust. And honestly, I didn't have the bandwidth to fight over spreadsheets anymore. Not with Tyson, not with the only family I had left. Zuri beamed. "You're doing the right thing. This is going to make everything so much easier." Tyson hugged me on the porch before I left. "Thanks, Mom. Seriously, you'll see, it's just a technicality." I looked at him, my son, the boy who used to fall asleep on my office floor while Harold and I worked late into the night, the man who now stood beside a woman I didn't quite trust, but who clearly meant everything to him. Maybe I was overthinking it. Maybe I was just tired. Maybe this was what trusting your grown child looked like. After all, a contract is just paper. I still had Harold. I still had Tyson. I still had trust. Or so I thought. Old habits die hard. I hadn't logged into the Whitmore and Associates business banking dashboard in months, not since I handed the reins to Tyson and signed that temporary ownership transfer. But one quiet Saturday morning, while sorting through old tax documents, I decided to check it. Just instinct. The login still worked. At first glance, everything seemed normal. Balance was healthy, no overdrafts, no alerts. But then I clicked into the expense reports, force of habit, and that's when I saw it. An $1,800 charge at Chanel. 2 weeks prior. I frowned. We didn't have clients who needed designer handbags. Then another, $950 at a high-end spa in Back Bay. Coded under Client Entertainment. A $2,600 charge for a luxury dining experience at a rooftop restaurant in Manhattan. $9,100. Business class round-trip tickets to Paris. Every expense was tagged as client engagement, branding opportunity, or partnership exploration, and every one of them had a digital authorization signature attached. Tyson's. At first, I told myself there had to be a mistake. Maybe the codes were wrong. Maybe these were expenses tied to some new venture I hadn't been fully briefed on. But the further I scrolled, the harder it became to rationalize. $3,400 at a boutique jewelry store in Soho. $1,100 on business casual wear at Nordstrom. A charge to a hotel in the 8th arrondissement of Paris, the Bristol, 5 nights. I sat back in my chair, heart pounding. My hands were cold, but my face was burning. These weren't business expenses. These were luxuries, vacations, shopping sprees. I clicked through to the PDF receipts attached to each line item. Some were scanned hotel invoices, others were credit card statements with vague notations, but every single one carried the same digital signature. Tyson Whitmore. Authorized user, managing member, temporary. I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to connect the dots. But I remembered the Chanel bag Zuri casually set on the kitchen island during last Sunday's coffee visit. I remembered her Instagram post a few weeks ago, when in Paris, with a blurry Eiffel Tower and 2 champagne glasses. I hadn't liked the post. I hadn't said anything, but now I couldn't unsee it. I opened the company's archive of client meetings, meticulously kept by our admin system. Whitmore and Associates hadn't had an international client meeting in over a year, and certainly not in France. We had no active clients in Europe. We hadn't in years. I stared at the screen. My eyes landed on one last charge. $5,800 memo. Gift. VIP client retention vendor. Cartier date. 1 day before their Paris flight. I froze. I may be older. I may have stepped back. But I built this company with my own hands. I know how business looks. And this? This wasn't business. I clicked the Details tab on the transaction. The signature glowed in the corner of the screen. Crisp, confident, familiar. Tyson. I didn't remember Whitmore and Associates ever meeting clients in Paris, but I remembered that signature. The Armani suit still fit. It had been dry cleaned and bagged since Harold's retirement dinner almost a decade ago, one of the last nights we were both introduced as co-founders in a room full of suits who hadn't taken me seriously until I started speaking. The heels were stiffer than I remembered. My shoulder ached slightly from the weight of the old leather briefcase, but as I stood in the mirror, adjusting the silver pin Harold gave me when we landed our first Fortune 500 contract, I didn't see a grieving widow anymore. I saw a woman who had signed every legal line that built Whitmore and Associates from the ground up, and I was done being erased. But what she didn't know, what she never stopped to consider, was that she wasn't stealing from a frail old woman who couldn't tell a spreadsheet from a scam. She was stealing from the woman who built the company. Zuri had gone too far, but she didn't realize what she was playing with. She was misusing the assets of someone who wasn't a fragile old lady. She was misusing the assets of me, the founder. Their house was dark when I arrived. Tyson and Zuri were in Aspen, another work-adjacent getaway, as Zuri had called it in her Instagram post, captioned with number wellness leadership. I hadn't told them I'd be stopping by. I still had a spare key given years ago, back when there was no reason to doubt. I told myself I wasn't there to snoop, just to confirm what I already feared. I stepped inside quietly, greeted by the hum of the refrigerator and the faint scent of eucalyptus candles, Zuri's signature touch. The kitchen gleamed, spotless and curated, like something from a design magazine. Their home was beautiful, but it had no soul. I walked past the wine rack, noting the bottles of French Reds and Napa Reserves I knew they couldn't afford. I passed the oversized wall calendar in the hallway. Tyson's name was barely on it. Zuri's was everywhere. Pilates, Zoom investor calls, styling appointments, lunch with estate advisor. I started in the home office. Drawers were locked. Zuri was cautious. I'll give her that. But Harold taught me that most people hide their worst ideas somewhere they can get to easily, usually because they think no one's watching. It was in the guest bedroom closet, an unlabeled white binder, tucked behind a stack of tax files in a portable filing box. At first glance, it looked harmless. A standard estate planning organizer, the kind you get from a legal seminar at a country club. Then I opened it. Inside were tabs labeled Medical Proxy, Durable POA, Asset Consolidation, Succession, and behind each tab was page after page of preparation, not for Zuri or Tyson's estate, but mine. The binder was filled with research printouts, copies of public property records for my home, old screenshots of Harold's obituary with his role in Whitmore and Associates highlighted, a checklist of early signs of cognitive decline, notes from a meeting with a lawyer specializing in elder law. There were sticky notes scribbled in Zuri's handwriting. Target, spring, suggest POA for security. Frame forgetfulness, keys, meds. Social media, soften narrative, worried about her. I kept flipping, breath shallow, until I reached the final pocket. A full-page handwritten timeline. Asset control plan, February. Plant seed RE, memory concern. March. Accidental overstep on business card. April. Suggest streamlining accounts for safety, June. Propose durable POA by August. Tyson as financial controller by Christmas. Full legal control of estate, Q1 next year. Dissolve Whitmore and Associates. Rebrand under new name. I stood there for a long time, staring at that single page. It wasn't a spontaneous betrayal. It was a blueprint. This wasn't just a case of poor judgment or selfish spending. This was strategic dismantling. Zuri had been positioning me as incompetent for months, not because she was concerned, but because it gave her leverage. Legal control, financial authority, total access. And Tyson? Was he complicit, or just the puppet? I took photos of everything, every page, every sticky note, every step in her twisted roadmap to full acquisition. Then I slid the binder exactly back where I found it. No confrontation. Not yet. Let her think she still had the upper hand. Let her post more photos. Let her sip champagne on someone else's dime. Because the next move wouldn't be made in secret. It would be made with receipts, with legal standing, with strategy. And this time, I wouldn't be reacting. I'd be playing offense. I didn't tell them what the dinner was about. I just said, Sunday, 6 p.m., come hungry. Tyson texted back a thumbs up. Zuri replied with a heart emoji and can't wait hearts. Of course she couldn't. I made pot roast, his favorite, the one Harold used to request every year on his birthday. The smell filled the house with memories I wasn't sure I wanted, but I needed the familiarity. Tonight, I wasn't just setting a table. I was setting a stage. They arrived exactly on time. Zuri breezed in, wearing a new blazer I recognized from a receipt tagged client gifting. The diamond bracelet on her wrist caught the light, the one she said Tyson had bought her for their anniversary. She gave me an air kiss and complimented the scent of the roast. Tyson followed behind, eyes tired, laptop bag still slung over one shoulder. You used that word when it suited you, I said. You weaponized it to gain access to a company you didn't build, and an inheritance you weren't entitled to. You crossed a legal line, and a moral one. She turned to Tyson. You're going to let her do this? Your own wife. Tyson looked at her, eyes hollow. You stopped being my wife the moment you started planning to replace my mother while she was still breathing. Zuri stood up, the chair scraping loudly behind her. You people are unbelievable. She's old. She was forgetting things. I documented everything, I said, sliding my phone across the table. Receipts, screenshots, that binder you kept labeled financial planning. I photographed every page. She flinched. If you refuse the terms, I said, I will take it all to the board, the bank, and the state attorney's office. Fraud, misuse of corporate funds, elder financial abuse. It won't just be you in trouble. Tyson's name is on many of those transactions. Do you want to drag him down with you? Zuri didn't answer. You're smart, I added. You know what corporate fraud looks like on paper. You've read enough contracts to know how this ends. I slid the folder across the table toward her. The top document, a promissory note. Below it, a non-compete agreement. Below that, a severance waiver. And finally, a cease and desist order should she attempt to make contact again after today. She looked down at the folder, then back up at me. "What gives you the right?" she hissed. I straightened my back. "I co-founded a company from nothing. I built a reputation in a male-dominated field before you were old enough to spell equity. I've negotiated deals with companies that would chew you up and spit you out before lunch. And you think I can't handle you?" Zuri's lips parted like she was about to say something. Some final defense, some last play. But nothing came out. "You have 48 hours," I said, stepping back from the table. "Sign and walk away, or don't. And find out what happens when you try to outmaneuver someone who's played this game longer than you've been alive." I paused at the doorway, letting the weight of the moment hang in the air. "I've won tougher negotiations than this, Zuri. And those people were a hell of a lot better at their jobs than you." The signed documents arrived in a plain envelope. No note, no explanation. Just Zuri's signature on every page, each one neater than the last, as if precision could mask the truth. She'd lost. Within 2 weeks, packages began showing up at my door. Boxes of designer clothes, handbags, even the diamond bracelet that had glinted in my kitchen light just days before. Each item matched an entry on the ledger Jennifer and I had compiled. Not everything could be returned. Some items were too far gone, others likely sold. But the full repayment arrived in a wire transfer 3 days later. Exactly $74,611.29, plus interest. I never saw Zuri again. Tyson moved into the guest room the night after our confrontation. No fight, no big scene. Just a quiet knock on my door around 11 p.m., and a suitcase in his hand. He didn't say much that first week. He made coffee in the morning, worked remotely during the day, and joined me for dinner most nights without prompting. We didn't talk about her, not at first. We just coexisted, like two people recovering from the same storm. It wasn't until the third Sunday that he brought it up. "I filed the papers," he said, sliding a thick envelope across the table. "Divorce documents. Filed. Signed." "I didn't want to tell you until it was done," he added. "I needed to make that decision for myself." I reached across the table and touched his hand. "I know." A month later, I met with Jennifer to finalize the wind-down of Whitmore and Associates. We reviewed the closing paperwork in my old conference room, now barely furnished, just the bones of what used to be a business built on trust, late nights, and coffee-stained contracts. "You sure?" Jennifer asked gently. "You could still restructure, come back in. Rebrand," I smiled, but it was the kind of smile that knows its time. "I built this company with Harold. It doesn't exist without him, and frankly, I'm tired." She nodded. "You're leaving on your terms. That's more than most people get." I signed the final documents with a steady hand. The LLC was officially closed. The accounts were dissolved. The name retired. 2 weeks later, I moved into a 2-bedroom condo overlooking the harbor. It wasn't flashy, but it was perfect. Floor-to-ceiling windows, clean white walls, no echoes of boardroom conversations or family dinners laced with tension. Just light, air, possibility. Tyson helped with the move, lifting boxes with quiet determination. He'd started seeing a therapist, started going on morning runs again. He looked healthier, lighter, like someone remembering who they used to be. I didn't keep much. Just a few pieces of furniture, my cookbooks, Harold's favorite armchair, and a photo of us from our very first client pitch. I left behind the rest. The house, the conference table, the memories that felt more like anchors than roots. I joined a local book club, took up photography. Every Tuesday morning, I walked the harbor with a group of retired women who shared gossip and sunscreen in equal measure. None of them knew who I used to be, and that was the best part. I was no longer Mrs. Whitmore, co-founder of Whitmore and Associates. I wasn't Tyson's mom or Zuri's mother-in-law. I was just Agatha. Me. Sometimes I still think about the empire we built. about the late nights Harold and I spent crafting proposals and fielding midnight calls from panicked clients. I think about the nameplate that used to sit on my desk and the way it felt to close a deal that everyone thought was dead. And then, I look around at the harbor view, the books on my shelf, the clean, quiet space I now call home, and I realize I once built an empire, and now I'm choosing to start over. For me, mornings are different now. No alarms, no back-to-back calls, no agendas color-coded in Google Calendar, just sunlight spilling across the hardwood floors and the slow ritual of making coffee, not for productivity, but for pleasure. I joined a walking group 3 weeks after I moved into the condo, then a meditation class, then a local photography course for creative adults over 60, which is just a kind way of saying people who've lived enough to know what really matters. I bought my first camera, a real one. I walked the harbor most evenings, catching sunsets, gulls in mid-flight, couples walking dogs. I hadn't realized how much beauty existed in stillness until I slowed down enough to see it. Some afternoons, I meet my new friends for lunch. We talk about books, retirement, politics, the outrageous price of avocados. None of them care what I used to do. None of them ask about Zuri. It's like starting life without the preamble. And Tyson? He found himself again. After filing for divorce, he took time off, then landed a job as a strategy director for a clean energy startup. Good salary, flexible hours, a real mission. He looks different now, lighter, like the shadows under his eyes left with her. One Saturday morning, he showed up with 2 plane tickets to Lisbon. "You said once that you and Dad always wanted to go," he said, holding them out. I hadn't been on a plane in nearly a decade. I almost said no. But the look in his eyes, the excitement, the care, was the same boy who used to bring me wildflowers from the schoolyard. So we went. 10 days of architecture, seafood, wine, and laughter I hadn't heard in years. No posts, no pressure, just the two of us, rediscovering the rhythm that used to define our bond. When we returned, we spent the weekend in my tiny backyard, replanting the rose bushes Harold once loved. Tyson dug while I watered. The sun warmed our backs. Dirt filled our fingernails. For a moment, it was like the 3 of us were all there again. And then, just yesterday, I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop. There was a message from an old friend I hadn't spoken to in years, someone from my early consulting days. "Heard about the company. Heard about Zuri. I'm sorry. How are you? Really?" I stared at the blinking cursor for a long moment before typing. She took the money. But I got back what mattered most: my son and myself. Then I closed the lid, stood up, and walked out onto my balcony. The harbor sparkled beneath me. Boats moved lazily through the water, unhurried, unburdened. And I realized something I'd never said out loud before. Not even to Harold. For the first time in my life, I don't need a boardroom. I don't need a title, or a nameplate, or a legacy to prove anything. I just need to live, fully, quietly, unapologetically, me.